Thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is David Fleck. I'm the founder of Freeflow Ventures. I'm joined by my partner Kevin Barrett as well, and also fortunate enough to have a good representation of just who we are, and also including CEO JJ Kang of Appia Bio, Chris Douvos, the founder of Ahoy Capital, Tom Miller, who is the CEO of Entos, and Mory there as well, who is the founder of TooFon. So I actually wanted to get started today with just a little bit of an intro to even this topic and conversation by playing this short video. Our world and our health face challenges that only science can solve. Where are the necessary breakthroughs going to come from? And how can venture play a meaningful role? We started Freeflow because we believe in the power and potential of science. Freeflow is about making impact on the world's biggest challenges. You can solve extraordinarily difficult problems, but also generate extraordinary investor returns.
I do think a move to more science makes sense, because I think what we've seen in the pandemic is how badly we need a vaccine or drugs to treat the disease, or how badly we need real-time diagnostics. And all of that, I think, has just kind of reminded us how important science is.
Well, Caltech is a very pure research unit. There really is nothing like it, and many people have had sort of dual careers. On the one hand, developing basic ideas, and on the other hand, translating them into actual products. I help people form companies and have done that through my whole career. The faculty today are anxious to develop the translational aspect of their work. Why the sort of the gestalt of the world is ultimately beneficial to the human population.
The tools that we develop at Entos have lots of practical applicability. We have developed tools to predict the toxicity of given molecules, the efficacy with which they can be metabolized, and that has extraordinary impact in the tackling of extremely pressing issues like the COVID pandemic. Freeflow has been there from the very start with Entos. I think that's incredibly exciting to see these tools develop in the laboratory, to get spun out into the real world, to have a real impact in that world.
The impact of science is transformative. It can literally change the world. It is amazing that we get to help the heroes, the scientists that are helping humanity. So I wanted to begin this actually by just going around and having everybody introduce themselves and give a little bit of background as to who they are and what their company does. So let's start with, just to get it started, perhaps with JJ.
Sure. Hi, I'm JJ Kang. I am CEO of Appia Bio, which is an allogenic cell therapy company. So our company, and tell me if I'm at the right level, and I could always dig into more details. We're pursuing making an off-the-shelf cell therapy that can be used for treating cancer. So as some of you guys might know, there's been significant inroads made with kind of a personalized form of cell therapy. So they take the blood from your vein, engineer it, put it back. And so that's shown in some cases significant efficacy improvements, but it's highly personalized, and so it's very expensive, and the access is not what it could be with, say, off-the-shelf drugs that we have today. So in solving for some immunological hurdles for what causes it to be personalized, we're looking to bring that type of cell therapy efficacy to a broader patient context, and kind of make advances on that technology generally for broader applications across cancer. Myself, by background, I was previously a partner at the Column Group, which is a company building life sciences VC. And then I'll continue on my board roles there as a venture partner. Prior to that, I was a Caltech PhD in chemical biology. Previous to that, I also did corporate strategy and project management at a clinical stage biotech called FibroGen.
Great, thank you. I'm just looking at my screen, but Chris, do you want to go next?
Sure, and I can assure you that I'm the least smart person on this entire panel, but yet I'm the money behind the money. So I'm.
Was that a Doctor? That was a Dr. Evil reference, yeah. I believe.
I'm going to invest $1 million. So I run a fund called Ahoy Capital, and we invest in both fund vehicles as well as startups, with an increasing focus on what people call deep tech or frontier tech. And with a particular emphasis on helping new groups get off the ground. And we've been kind of doing that for almost 20 years, with, helping groups like First Round and Data Collective kind of as their first, kind of cornerstone investor. We are proud investors in Freeflow and excited to be kind of in this mix.
Thank you. Tom, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Tom Miller. I'm the CEO of Entos. Entos is a software company that uses new ways of mapping chemical space to accelerate the discovery process for a whole range of different industries, ranging from the chemicals industry to the pharma industry and the materials industries. So we have a software platform that enables us to generate these proprietary features, and we have a machine learning infrastructure that enables us to drive that discovery. And we were founded just in April. Was when the seed money, including that with Freeflow, landed, and we've been building rapidly since then. In terms of my background, I am still a Caltech professor. I've been there since 2008. I've taken a year and a half sabbatical to help launch this company, into which I'm having just a great time. And I'm happy to join the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, Mory.
Hi, good morning again. I'm Mory Gharib, one of the founders of TooFon, a company that focuses on developing high lift drones, unconventional lifts up to 150 to 400 pounds for last mile delivery. And also I've been a founder of a couple of other companies like Glaukos as a public company and Argus, all Caltech's fund companies. And my other job, I'm also the chair of Aerospace Department at Caltech and also director of Center for Autonomous Systems and Technologies. So the COVID-19 gave me an opportunity to spend a little time and TooFon and trying to put it together, and I'm pretty excited about it.
Thank you. There are only 24 hours in your day as well, right? Isn't that a standard unit?
Yep.
No, always impressive. So the first question, actually, because of what we're talking about today, which is, the founders and the CEOs that you see here are companies that have their roots at Caltech, one of the most amazing, research institutes in the world. And, I wanted to actually kick it over to Chris first, because you've made investments in, you referenced this, you've made investments in not only Freeflow, we thank you for that, but just we're not the first. You've done this before. And so I'm just curious, to set the stage a little bit, what do you see with, maybe what are some of those other investments to if you can disclose, but also just what do you see within, the university ecosystems at these top institutes?
Sure. And so just for context, in addition to Freeflow, we've invested in E14 fund at MIT at the, they're kind of working with the Media Lab, a couple of great partners there. House Fund at Berkeley, they're doing some exciting stuff in different types of hardware and AI and a whole bunch of other things, kind of a great group there. And then another group called Rhapsody out of Boston, which doesn't have a formal affiliation, but does do a lot of stuff, including a company called Fluid Efficiency that came out of Caltech. So they do a lot of material science stuff and what have you. And so it's been kind of a long journey, because I started my investing career actually, right out of business school. And actually, even before business school, I was a strategy consultant. I worked with a group called Monitor Company, and we did a ton of work with AT&T. And I got staffed, and everybody. By the way, I'll tell a quick story. Everybody hated working on AT&T projects because it's like the most miserable, bureaucratic, awful organization. And so one day I walk into this staffer's office, and he says, "Hey, we got this great opportunity for you. You're going to be working with a startup, but it's a startup with a heritage." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, tell me about it." He's like, "Yeah, it's super dynamic. They've got a whole new attitude. It's this company called Lucent." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And it was basically same people, different business cards, all brilliant, but hugely bureaucratic and challenging. But working at Lucent, I got to hang out with some of the folks at Bell Labs and was just kind of mind on fire with some of the stuff that was, going on there. And then I started my investing career after business school at Princeton University's endowment. And we had Sarnoff Labs, there in Princeton, which was an amazing kind of fount of innovation. And as I started spending more time in venture capital and starting to see how, kind of corporate innovation was basically being outsourced to the venture capital industry, I started thinking, wow, there's something really interesting going on there. And then it all kind of crystallized when I actually sat next to Nathan Myhrvold at a meeting one day, and he goes, people are talking about innovation, but innovation is easy. Invention is hard. And like that really kind of stuck with me, that kind of chasm between, innovation is important, but it's invention where kind of real value is created. And then, kind of over the past, then the next 10 years, kind of from 2005 to 2015, well, what I saw as an investor in venture capital is, capital started becoming commodified. And as capital became commodified, we started to see weaponized balance sheets. And what that meant was like we had all this promise of what people were talking about, in terms of lean startup, it was going to get more efficient to, kind of start and scale a company. That actually all reversed, because basically every like vaguely interesting space just turned into a, kind of a race to see who could, buy the, biggest market, buying eyeballs, buying attention, what have you. And the speed at which frontier markets became mainstream, started to shock me. And so as I started to spend more time with folks in university context, I started to say, wow, here's this like the old neuron fired, like here's the invention part of this. And I started spending time with the, guys at MIT and, Calvin and Habib at E14 and a bunch of different folks kind of across the ecosystem, 2015, 2016, 2017. I said, wow, this is actually where the exciting returns are going to be going forward. We can invest in the nth dating app or the, Z, kind of SaaS company. But ultimately, the real kind of value that's going to be created both in the economy and for society is in going from 0 to 1. That kind of, I think in German, the word is Götterfunken, which I'm not pronouncing well, but it's the divine spark of the gods. And so that's what I look for and find often at universities.
Thank you. To take building on that concept, actually, I wanted to ask Mory. So, you founded Glaukos, couple $1 billion market cap now, and some other companies too. I'm just curious, when you consider a research area that may be ripe for commercialization. I mean, maybe introduce us to the secret sauce. How do you find things? What things are worth it? How do you construct the early stages? I'd love to hear some thoughts on that.
Well, I've always this constant battle between innovation and invention. I mean, because innovation in some sense is driving force for your everyday research. You want to discover things and try to, push the frontiers. On the other hand, inventions are a very narrow corner of that innovation. That's where most of the fruit is in terms of the impact you have on the society or other aspects of the business. So in my approach, I usually look for ideas that I will see that in few years, they're going to fill up the big gap. Not necessarily they're going to be the low-hanging fruit. Of course, if there is a low-hanging fruit, I will consider it, but that's not necessarily for me a parameter. But something that eventually is going to revolutionize the current, the state of the art in actually doing something. Like Galacos, for 20 years, the only solution we had was drops in the eye to basically treat glaucoma. Okay, nobody tried to see if we can have a device that actually easily can be implanted without major surgeries and all those things. So that's the challenge I took, but it comes also from background and type of research I was doing in microfluidics. And that allowed us to come up with a device that basically frees you from putting drop in your eyes. And suddenly it changed the whole game and the treatment of the glaucoma today. It's a 20-minute operation. We do it with cataracts, and then you're free from putting drops for the rest of your life. So these are kind of approaches that I'm looking for. I try not to. Same thing with this drone company, TooFon. If you look around, I'll see that from Amazon to the Walmart to Google, their drones, if you look at them, is basically kind of trying to what do you call it, cosmetically improve it, a standard DJI toy. That then they push it to put something on it. So our approach was that let's forget about that. With the state of the art in, say, AI, machine learning, and also new approach to aerodynamics combination, can you just put that crowd behind and go to a range of, not just a shoebox that Amazon delivers, to something that I can deliver a ventilator, okay, which is over, the 10 pounds or 20 pounds. And nobody touches that market. That's where we went in and say, okay, this is a huge market in terms of not only impact, societal impact, also for the commercialization of business. So I mean, may not fit everybody's approach, but I always try to leave the crowd and
yeah. No, that's at least for us, and what we consistently see is these are not improvements at the margin. Everything that we see, and that's so it's big bets, but coming at usually I call it piercingly orthogonal. It's like coming in at just a completely different angle into a problem that if you get it right, and because it's science, you can almost prove that it's right or prove that it has a shot. It can just disrupt entire industries. Big ideas.
That I'm sure that Tom and Kang, appreciate this, but for us at Caltech, or coming from Caltech, we are very vigilant in understanding what's going on and then go 10 layers deeper and see what is driving. And that always, our guide in order to come up with solutions and we can see.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Now, actually, was thinking might make sense to ask Tom, a question. If you think of like Chris's, introduction or laying the foundational work for university investments, then you've done it a few times, Mory, and what you look for. And I've taken the leap again here recently. But then Tom, for example, this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first venture that you've done actually. And so, what made you just make that leap? And you even have taken a sabbatical, which is a huge commitment. So maybe just walk us through that thinking as well. You're on mute.
You're on mute, Tom.
Yeah. So yes, your introduction is correct. This is the first company that I founded. I do see Bob Grubbs is on the call, and we have also had some fun work with him as well that is leading to commercialization on the battery front. But Entos is really the first big plunge that we've taken, and it's been tremendously exciting making that leap from more of an academic mode of operation, which, as Mory says, is all about the depth, all about the novelty, all about the kind of creative solution, and then turning that into something that is more than a proof of principle, but something that can be translated into huge impact, is kind of the completion of that development idea. I sometimes feel like in academics, it's tremendously rewarding, but you're doing the first half of the sentence all the time. And to complete that sentence and to actually take it to market and to see what that implies for what works and doesn't work has been an extremely exciting process. And, it really enables you to take these new innovations the full way. So I have taken this extended sabbatical. Caltech is actually a very supportive environment in that regard, in terms of having kind of minimal constraints in terms of sabbaticals that can be taken, and also allowing them to be for sustained periods. In my case, it'll be over a year and a half. So this makes a very enticing innovation environment that we're definitely benefiting from.
Thank you. So JJ, now over to you. I think the first question that we had was just around the fact that you were one of us. You were one of us, actually. You were at the column group, and then you were struck by this idea, in collaboration with Lily and David and many others. But just what made this the one that you would leave that for this?
Well, I think to begin, part of the draw for me to go to the column group, I mentioned it's a company building life science VC, so it's very tied into that entrepreneurship, which has always been a strong interest for me. And VC is fantastic because you get to see new ideas and technologies, you're digging into them, but you're a little itinerant in that you're learning new fields, but you're jumping around a little bit, and you can't quite get as deep into the details as if you kind of settled into that one field. And I think, when I saw this project in particular, this is something that I wanted to really dig into, and I mean, dig into and problem solve and build around going forward over a long period of time. And I think, as an investor, there's a limit to how deeply and involved you can get, right, before it becomes micromanaging, if you will. And so I think this just felt like that shot, and it's a little bit like put me in, coach, that you want to get in there. So that was my motivation, and this project and set of technologies, I think, was pretty compelling for having line of sight to translatability. So I think as an investor with those eyes, it made sense to do. You want both the beginning of the sentence has to be strong, as Tom was saying, and then you want to be able to see where that there's going to be a period there, and imagine and have the vision to get yourself and your team there. And so for me, this is the one that made the most sense for me.
Makes sense. And I wanted to interject real quickly and say, feel free, for those of you that are watching, to put into the chat or the Q&A questions, and we'll try to get to those. We'll weave those in for sure, best we can. But if not, you can contact me afterwards, david@freeflow.io, and I'll try to answer them as well. So thanks again for joining. So piggybacking off that, JJ, I actually wanted to ask, perhaps I'll direct this one to Mory, but I know that you have a lot of experience as well with this, JJ, because of the other institutes that were involved. But Mory, can you talk a little bit about what the process is like, even getting technology, who initially owns the IP? Because a lot of these ideas have IP as part of them, for sure. IP doesn't make a company, but sometimes it's foundational to the beginning of a company. Can you talk a little bit about how that process works with Caltech?
He's on mute at the moment, David.
So actually, JJ, can you talk?
Let's go to JJ and just talk about the fact that Appia Bio is a really interesting collaboration, not just involving Caltech, but UCLA, which you've already mentioned, and USC. So you have three sort of pillars of the greater LA community involved, which sounds great, but also suggests a fair amount of complexity and complications. So maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah. Well, I'll just make a couple comments. I think in startup, people are incredibly important. And so for looking at Appia, I think the fact that actually everyone has Caltech connections there. So between David Baltimore and then some of our management, myself included, came through Caltech, and the other founders were all at Caltech at various points. So it makes a big difference that the founding team works well together. And so I think that flows into everything else about the business as well. So and the academic founders have collaborated with each other for years to develop the technology that we're making use of today. And so, without getting into the nitty-gritty of, tech transfer licensing, I think having that kind of solid, cooperative, and aligned motivation, I think at the end of the day, the tech transfer offices are there to push the technologies forward and see them develop, and then having the founders encourage that as well from time to time, which might be necessary. I think that all helps.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, and just to interject, from my perspective as an investor, probably the thing that's changed most, in the 20 years I've been doing this, and then even going back further to my time in college, where, by the way, I went to Yale, where anything commercial was deemed infradignitatum. There's a sullying effect of anything that was, that was businesslike, and that's what we left to graduates of the economics department, rather than the sainted, the sainted other departments. But nonetheless, I think people have seen, the kind of impact on, the kind of translational impact from the university to society. And not just that, but the wealth that's been created. I'm here in Palo Alto, literally a mile and a half from Stanford, which is done exceedingly well, in this regard. And I think that's really kind of altered, the outlook of a lot of folks. And there's much more dynamism, I think, in tech transfer offices than there was, even 10 years ago. And that's been great. Now the challenge, and just maybe speaking more broadly, and not to go in a different direction, but one thing that I struggle with when I talk to university, kind of university oriented or university initiated startups, is sometimes there's a lack of kind of commercial sense, and one thing that we spend a lot of time talking about is, our kind of, how do you get to unit economics at scale? What's the consumer value proposition? And I think, that the university, kind of initiated spin-outs that can navigate tech transfer and then kind of address and, a large market in a sensible, kind of unit economics way. That's kind of the missing piece that I see probably most often today.
Chris, back to you just with a question. So now when you mentioned E14 and MIT, Freeflow, Caltech, like what what are you looking for now? I mean, what do you think? Yeah, just maybe comment on what you're looking for now, or how do you see this unfolding? Are there other untapped areas that you think might be interesting as well?
Well, look, we're testing a bunch of hypotheses, and often kind of joint hypotheses. So that's one of the challenges. And one of the ways we test joint hypotheses is are we in the right places, doing the right things with the right people. And I think in the case of Freeflow and some of the others you mentioned, we check all those boxes. The thing that I'm kind of continually interested in is I think I was at a DFJ meeting in like 2003 or 4, and I think Ray Kurzweil was up there, and he said, the life is code, right? Like the ATGC, I'm sorry, I'm using science, like that's above my kind of Yale brain. But the mix of that is just coding, and that's going to offer infinite possibilities and kind of going forward. We're starting to see a lot of that today. So that's an area that we continue. Computational biology stuff is continuing to be an interesting area. And then just in terms of locales, my next kind of the next place I'm kind of pointing my financial pistol is probably CMU, which I think is probably one of the more untapped kind of areas. And there's a lot of reasons that CMU might be more of a challenge than some of the other places we've mentioned. Because Pittsburgh may not have critical mass in terms of building companies, but there's some amazing technology at CMU. And I'm kind of a value investor. And I always say that one of my initial hypotheses around Berkeley was, as an investor, I'm always thinking in the context of price. Price is your return is a function of price. And I look at what startups get priced at coming out of Stanford, and boy, if I could do a pairs trade and go long Berkeley and short Stanford, I'd be a wealthy man.
That's a fair point. Do you find the valuations to be markedly different, actually, between ecosystems or between maybe university and everything else, if you want to bifurcate it that way, however you think about it?
Yeah, so basically in the university world, there's basically Stanford and everything else. And so, at least from my perspective, it might vary in kind of, specific areas, but in the main, the kind of mean, and even median, Stanford is kind of so far, above, and I think there's a premium there that that may not be justified. Certainly lots of great stuff going on, but so much great stuff going on at Cal, so much great stuff going on at Caltech, so much great stuff going on at MIT, and you just don't see the silly valuations. So that's the challenge. Well, one thing that I have seen more recently is that university-initiated startups, or originated startups, are seeing a lot of kind of follow-on interest. So there's actually a great role for people like Freeflow, to be kind of almost a bird dog on some interesting campuses. And then once companies get traction, then there's actually kind of an increasing amount of capital available, and a lot of interest in these types of deals.
Cool, thank you, JJ. To you, a question I had was just around, your scientific founding team. You have, for example, David Baltimore, former president emeritus of Caltech, and then Nobel Prize winner. How do you think about involving, someone like that, or just, and Lily as well, right? I mean, just amazing scientific founders. As you start to commercialize now, before the start, you were giving us a little bit of an update just to us in terms of some of the progress, but just how do you involve people like that as you continue to march down this path?
Yeah, so great question, because I think especially when you start, when the interest is to start on the basis of science and start really early, the better you manage that, the better your company is. And so I think you're spot on there. And so what we try to do is we have kind of periodic meetings, and pretty often. So right now, we'll probably aim for them to be once every 2 weeks or once every month, where we meet with our scientific founders and have data presentations on the research. Now, grant you, we just started in our labs last week, so the first experiments are starting, so we don't have a ton of data. But I think, in the next weeks, that will be changing. And so I think having their eyes on it and having them integrated in to the research management and getting their thoughts, there's obviously a vast amount of knowledge and insight that they bring. But in addition to that, I think there's a standard of scientific rigor and an expectation of quality that helps build the culture that sets course for your company. And so that's another thing that we're lucky enough to be able to draw from our scientific founders.
Thank you.
May I add something to that, David?
Go ahead, Mory. Yeah.
So it's so right what you said, that it's important that founders, especially the more senior ones, to make sure that they create the right culture within the company. So initially, it's going to be lots of, challenges for us to make sure the team gets that flavor of why we're here, what is it that we're trying to do. And that's, to me, it's a key for a successful company to proceed. And it's a challenge, and some of us, we think that, once we license it, put few the bright people, they can solve the problem. Yeah, that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. You need to also mold them into the culture of company. That's something that you think is problem solving, not to panic, and also to be persistent.
Thanks, Mory. One question I wanted to ask next was actually to Tom. So just a little bit about, this is your first rodeo, if you will, on this one, and you're doing a great job. So I just saw in the Q&A that Dan Lieber asked a question about, for first-time CEOs, what support is provided, for mentoring and to deal with the more challenging decisions. So just maybe talk a little bit about that as someone who's doing this for the first time. How are you doing? How are you finding that support?
Yeah, I think that support comes from a number of different avenues. Having been a professor for over a decade, I have a group of, 80 alumni from my lab over those years. So, there's been a certain amount of rodeo riding through that has led to kind of experience with dealing with groups of people. And I found that that's been a pretty transferable set of skills to starting a company. It's a lot like when I first started at Caltech, the joy of starting a new research group there is not unlike the launching of a new company with your own vision and trying to imprint that and to establish the culture, as Mory says. So I think that's been a fantastic process. But there are things that are different when you start running a company, and that definitely benefits from mentorship from a lot of different corners. And Caltech itself has been making strides to provide that infrastructure that's done through entrepreneurs in residence that help through the fundraising process, help through the initial spin-out phase, provide a non-affiliated set of voices for negotiations with Caltech. So that's been a good thing. Of course, senior colleagues, the Caltech has a lot of innovation in terms of the overall ecosystem. People like Mory, people like Bob Grubbs, people like, there's many people that have, people like David Baltimore who have launched companies in the past who are always very generous with their time and with their expertise in offering those insights. And actually our investors have also been a valuable source of feedback and guidance through this process. We have, in addition to Freeflow, we've also worked with, we're also funded by Nexus Ventures, and these are groups that focus on seed and the issues that seed companies have, and both of our investment partners have been extremely supportive in that regard.
Thank you. And maybe just to piggyback on that question or on that response for a moment, and this is open to, this question is really open to JJ, you, or Mory. Maybe give a little bit of insight into even what does a lab mean at a university. I think there's a little bit of a peeking behind the, behind the curtain a little bit, that because oftentimes what we find is that the companies are pretty dang mature when we find them, because even though the company might have just been formed, it's been going on in the lab for a while. So maybe give a little bit of insight into what does a lab look like how many people are there, or maybe how much. Go ahead,
David. Since I have to leave, I would like to make comment on that one. It's a fantastic question you ask. So I always tell everybody that at Caltech, it's amazing that every lab is like a startup. Not in a commercial sense. It's a startup in the culture and how we run as a teamwork, and those aspects of that's important for a startup. And the environment that you see going to each lab is the labs that basically you see that they make breakthroughs and they really innovative, but they have eyes on inventions. Okay, so in my group, I encourage all of my students that if you have an idea, don't downplay it. See and evaluate, and if it's possible, file a disclosure, because it's important to protect our ideas and IPs while we are doing, innovative basic research and as a platform. And that's the culture that we have in most of our labs in Caltech.
Thank you. And maybe, to build on that a little bit, with I want to go back to Tom actually on this question. I think maybe speak to some of the traction that you have with customers, no names or names, however you want to answer that question, but just directionally kind of what companies they are, because I think there's this preconceived notion, I think, that even we had, that the companies it'd be much, perhaps longer than it is actually taking, and we see this evidence by actually everyone on this panel, but just that you're able to get product market fit and customer traction sooner. So maybe just talk about that a little bit and what's been key to having that success.
Right. Yes, and in addition, we have products that roll out on different timescales, and we have objectives that hit commercialization on different timescales. And from the get-go, we had some simulation capabilities that were really adding value to a number of different companies. So we have a long-standing relationship with Dow Chemical. We have a relationship with Amgen Pharmaceuticals as well, that both were formed even before the company was launched, and that provided us with a good sense that we had a differentiated product and that could really do something big. And yet, the amount of new stuff that has happened over the last 6 months, even since the company was launched, and the plans for the upcoming periods of time are just going to be sea changes beyond those initial relations. And the exciting thing is, from that strong initial starting point, there have been many additional pharma companies and materials and chemistry companies that are indeed enjoying good traction with, and are building that portfolio.
Thank you. And just a reminder to participants, put questions into the Q&A or the chat, and we'll try to get to them during our conversation. One thing obviously that's top of mind, I think, for people today is COVID-19. And this is a question, I guess, to any of you that wish to tackle it. But how are you seeing science today tackling this big problem that's in front of us? And it could be using your platform, or maybe it's just what you see out there that you think is promising. Because you're some of the best in the world. So, love to hear your thoughts on that.
I can jump in with a couple of quick thoughts. We've actually seen it influence our work in two very direct ways. On the one hand, as an application domain, we're doing molecular discovery. and pharmaceuticals is a huge market for that. So it's created a lot of opportunities in terms of specific targets and specific research objectives and tools. The other interesting way in which it's influenced us is through the this massive shift towards remote work and remote learning and remote research, to the extent that that's possible. So platforms that can be amenable to that, including software-driven, machine learning, AI-driven platforms, robotics platforms, those all are social distancing friendly. So we've seen both of those influences.
And maybe to point it over to Chris now, because you'll probably have some other language, some wisdom that you want to share with us. But in all seriousness, I want to ask, do you think that this situation today, while awful for humanity, to be clear, puts wind in the sail of your thesis, or just of science, kind of science as an investable asset class?
I think that statement is true. I think that there is wind in the sails of science, broadly speaking. I think that my optimism, and I'm kind of a techno-utopian, right? I believe that science and technology will solve all of humanity's problems, and we're on the cusp of an age of abundance. But then I go in my Twitter feed, and I see that, and I'd love other folks' perspective on this. I feel like we've never had a more, kind of anti-science climate, in the country, and even kind of respect for, kind of scientific method, in terms of, kind of hypothesis testing and data collection and such, is under threat. And I think one of the challenges that, we've been, kind of, a burden under which we labor, is as a result of social media. It's always been true that that a lie can spread around the world before the truth gets out of bed. But now with Twitter and other platforms, the truth is still in heavy REM sleep while lies are spreading even faster. That's a challenge.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that. Chris, you made the earlier point that in some sense, a traditional university attitude that you espoused at Yale was, or that you mentioned was espoused at Yale, was that, in some sense, commercialization isn't our business, and that's not what we should be holding as an objective. And I think given this climate, it is ever more incumbent upon universities to translate their science from the echo chamber of their own conferences to the world around you, to really, to make that translational leap and to have that impact in the world that is more visible to people and that they will then appreciate. You can be a vaccine denier, but you want to live longer. And at some level, it'll shake out in terms of what you believe and how you act based on what is really available and tangible reality.
I want to support.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to support that notion that Tom Lu stated. I think it's, we have to fight for it, because it's not just going to happen by itself. And if there's, countervailing force, we have to push back. And I think having that tangible impact is one of the most visceral ways that you can make the point.
And the other thing that keeps me optimistic is there's so much kind of entrepreneurial spirit and entrepreneurial energy in the students, in the youth today. I think the institutions themselves are more entrepreneurial, and I think that that they're that's probably the biggest change that I've seen in the last probably in the last 10 years, is just the level of energy at the at the student level. And kind of being exposed and to all the great innovations that are going on across all different kinds of areas. They're almost the the evangelists that are gonna kind of be the foot soldiers of the science revolution, hopefully.
Hey, Chris, actually, a follow-up question I had on that topic is: have you seen? I mean, what we've seen, and part of our thesis is that some of this, conventional wisdom around science-based startups is false. And by that, what I mean is the amount of money that you need to create a company. Maybe JJ, you can even talk to this too, but just is less than it was. So it's almost analogous to that whole app boom, if you will. The cost of CS stuff, it just was a lot easier, or a lot cheaper today than it was 5 years ago. Is that, or do you see that? Do you believe that's true? If you could comment on that, either of you.
I've got some thoughts, but do you want to take a crack, JJ?
Sure. I mean, I think, and Chris, love to hear your thoughts on it. I think, at least in life sciences, I think it actually does take quite a bit of capital. But that's also partly the model that a set of VCs have taken. At the same time, at the end of the day, through kind of the regulatory process and all that, the data wins out. So you can start small with the seed and grow it, but to get you to your drug, it's still going to take quite the capital to get through all those all that R&D and the trials.
So, one hypothesis that I had, and we started, I was hanging around with guys like Tim O'Reilly and Josh Koppelman in kind of 2003, 2004, and Eric Ries and all these kind of lean startup guys. And, a lot of the factors that, underpin lean startup, kind of started in the web economy in software. But what amazed me is, and I had this hypothesis, and I started hanging out with Chris Anderson, who was at 3D Robotics, and Chris started saying things like, look, we've got now a library of components that, are cheap and plentiful that used to be unobtainium, right? Like just kind of military grade stuff that we can put on our, that was impossible to get, that now is like consumerized. And so I started to see this, these different waves kind of propagate through, kind of through different areas of, of the world. Now, the reality is there's certain things that will never, get cheaper. I mean, JJ is spot on, about elements of that. But what's interesting is that as we see that some of these kind of techniques, kind of spread through the entrepreneurial, finance world and the ecosystem of innovation, certain things are getting cheaper, and they're kind of new modalities of doing things. And so I think about a company like Flatiron Health, that we were investors in, through first round, that said, hey, let's think about data in a different way, to make, trials, kind of cheaper, clinical trials cheaper, more effective, all that stuff. And so I do think that, while I do worry that capital, the kind of real trend among investors towards capital efficiency, makes it challenging for some people to invest in science-based startups. I think the reality is there's more perception there than reality, and I think there's some clever people who are making the costs come down, while still generating real innovative value.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, Tom, it was instructive to hear your perspective on just the lab itself too, and just, just how you run things. It is analogous to a startup, right? It's not your first rodeo. Is kind of what I heard. So
yeah, it's a point that Mory made as well. The fact that there's an entrepreneurial element to running a research group. And, you asked this question, what's a lab actually look like under the hood at a university? And it looks like a small startup. It's depends on the size of the group, between kind of 10 and 30 people that are focused on a set of goals that are established by the PI that are subject to funding constraints. And, so it has a lot of the analogous realities of a startup, at least at the earliest stage.
Yeah. One question I had, is just, so there's, we think about things sometimes in terms of like, what are those almost existential crises for humanity, that, and obviously COVID-19 is one, there's also climate. I'd love to hear perhaps, Chris, from you, just, do you think, is that an investable thesis? Do you think in some ways almost COVID makes climate almost an easier thesis because now people are kind of waking up to some of the things that are hitting them in the face?
I think there's certainly a lot there. to support more interest in climate stuff. I think as an investor, a lot of people have kind of lived through the clean tech wave of the kind of mid 2000s, and some of the problems are like so large and amorphous that it's kind of tough to understand as an investor how to get how to ring the register and make money. And we've seen some of these spaces have been kind of overly dependent on government subsidies and et cetera. But I think it's a societal imperative, and we've got to figure out how to crack that nut. It's just something I've had trouble wrapping my arms around. But if we can find a company that's got innovative science and has attractive unit economics at scale, I'm all for it.
Thank you. I think I just wanted to thank everybody for joining today. I think we're pushing up against the hour, and I know some of the panelists have Zoom calls that are probably beginning in 3 minutes. So we'll let everyone have a few minutes to regroup before their next commitment. But just wanted to say thank you again to the panelists for coming today. Thank you so much for joining us, and to all the participants out there as well. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, guys.